Shakti, are you in Himachal?
No, Delhi.
Back.
Back in Delhi. And on way to Gujarat.
Okay. Oh yeah. Your base nowadays.
My base.
So we are already live now, and Ambassador Sinha has also joined us. So with your permission, can we begin?
You are the host.
Namaskar to all joining us today. I'm Manish Dabhade here, and I'm the founder of the Indian Futures. I take this opportunity to welcome you all today on behalf of the Indian Futures and our co-organizer, the Indian Association of International Studies. I obviously cannot begin by hoping that you and your loved ones are safe and healthy. We are still not out of corona in many ways. Let me at the outset introduce the Indian Futures very briefly. We are a New Delhi-based independent and idea startup that we call ourselves these days. That started out in January 2016 with the sole aim of creating a global platform to plainly and dispassionately discuss, in the truest ancient Indian tradition of Samvad, a dialogue about the ideas of New India in all their varied manifestations, dimensions, and even contestations. We are extremely proud to have recently hosted some of India's finest minds from the world of government, politics, academia, diplomacy, and culture. For example, Shri Suresh Prabhu, Dr. Vinay Sahasrabudhe, ICCR President. We have had Ambassador Kamal Sibal, Ambassador Nirupama Menon Rao, Ambassador Vijay Gokhale, my friend Harsh Pant, Professor Raja Mohan, Professor Makarand Paranjpe, Yamini Iyer too. And these are just very few names I've mentioned here. Please do follow us on all our social media such as Facebook, Twitter, Insta, YouTube, and of course feel free to share today's event with hashtag TIF Afghanistan, and kindly put yourself in mute mode to avoid any distractions in the program until we open up for the Q&A. We are here today for what me and many would believe a very timely discussion on the future of Afghanistan and India's options. I'm sure many of you are following the dramatic news coverage and largely academic debates on the unfolding scenarios in Afghanistan, on how it's always been a graveyard of empires for Britain earlier and Soviet Union, and also now the US. And of course, how the impending return of Taliban would mark the return of medievalism, or what many would call it, and many also would say the end of the global resolve of sorts on Afghanistan's future, obviously led by the US. To set the ball rolling, I wish to flag a couple of key concerns that animate analysts and decision makers, both now and would like our esteemed panelists, in fact, who are joining us today, to respond to in some way. First, obviously, the central question, are we seeing a return of the Islamic Emirate? And a more important related question, is this Mullah Omar's Taliban or something else? What we hear, what we read, good Taliban, moderate Taliban, or a new Taliban? Second, very important question, what are the key variables in play now that will determine Afghan future? Civil war, is its dire economic status, and or most importantly, external players? Third, what does it mean for India after investing its huge political capital and economic aid to the tune of almost $3 billion since 2001? So are we now back to hard power from the soft power which we saw from 2001? So here comes the central idea for today. Is Afghanistan's future its past? And what are India's options now? Even as Dr. S. Jaishankar very recently said, Afghanistan's future cannot be its past. And India wanted a neighborhood which was not threatened by, and I quote, terrorism, separatism, and extremism, unquote. And we are fortunate to have three very extraordinary panelists joining us today. Each of these brings years of rich experience and solid early wisdom attained by dealing firsthand with Afghanistan, and which really shapes their insights. Shri Shakti Sinha ji, we all know former PS to Prime Minister Vajpayee, was also ex-director of the Nehru Memorial and Museum Library. He's currently the director of AIPRIS, University of Baroda, and author of a blockbuster biography of Atal Bihari Vajpayee, which I'm sure many would you have read, and if you have not read it, please do read it. And has extensively studied Afghanistan over decades now. It's truly an honor for us that you have joined, sir. Thank you so much. We also have with us Ambassador Gautam Mukhopadhyay, who is the ambassador and joined the Center for CPR as a senior visiting fellow in June 2019 after a career in the Indian Foreign Service, during which he served in various very important diplomatic assignments, capacities in the Indian embassies and missions in Mexico, Cuba, France, UN, very important Ministry of Defense, Afghanistan. He was India's ambassador to Syria, Afghanistan 2010 to 2013, and Myanmar 2013 to 2016. Very significant, very sensitive diplomatic assignments. He, in fact, very importantly, also reopened the Indian embassy in Kabul in November 2001 as charge d'affaires after the ouster of Taliban in Afghanistan in November 2001. Again, a very prolific author, always keenly sought after in the media to speak on Afghanistan and other strategic issues in the neighborhood. Truly an honor, Ambassador Mukhopadhyay, for joining us today. As you can see, he's joining us
Pleasure.
from Manipur. We also are extremely fortunate to have Ambassador Amar Sinha with us. He retired from the Indian Foreign Service as Secretary Economic Relations in the MEA in June 2017 after a very glorious diplomatic career spanning 35 years. He has served in different capacities in Indian missions around the world, including in Algiers, Buenos Aires, you have Washington DC, Jakarta, Brussels. In 2013, he was appointed India's ambassador to Afghanistan. On his retirement from diplomatic service in 2017, he has been appointed as director on the board of Hindustan Petroleum Corporations Limited. He joined the RIS as a distinguished fellow in 2017, and very importantly, has lent support to several think tanks focused on Afghanistan and other strategic issues. He also advises chambers of commerce on trade and investment issues, and very importantly, is now the member of the National Security Advisory Board. Thank you, Ambassador Sinha, for joining us today morning. I'm also especially elated to have with us, who is in fact chairing today's session and is also host too, as the president of the Indian Association of International Studies, Professor Amitabh Mattoo. In fact, he's my senior colleague and a professor in the School of International Studies, CPOD, JNU, and also the University of Melbourne. He was former Vice Chancellor of the Jammu University and the founder director of the Australia-India Institute in Australia for many, many years. So I'll stop here and hand over the virtual floor to Professor Mattoo, who is chairing today's session. So over to you, sir.
Thank you very much, Dr. Manish Dabhade, and thank you very much for your kind words. I'm not sure which order we'll begin with, but the ones that I see on my screen is Ambassador Gautam Mukhopadhyay, Dr. Shakti Sinha, and Ambassador Amar Sinha. Would that order be fine with all three of you? Now, in terms of housekeeping, would you be fine with just speaking for about 10 minutes each? Initially, and
yeah,
then,
sir.
Sorry.
So we can start with your remarks, and then and maybe we can begin with the Shakti Sinha Saab.
Yeah, I think that sounds like a good proposal.
I'm fine with any order. Let Gautam Mukhopadhyay go first. I'm fine with that.
Anyway, let me also begin by saying a few words. I think we should begin from where we are. And in all candor, because this is an academic gathering, and certainly the one institution that I represent here is the Indian Association of International Studies. That this today, it's a reflection of probably the lowest point that India has had since Foreign Minister Jaswant Singh handed over Mullah Azhar, the Mushtaq Latram, and who was the other third person? To Foreign Minister Mutawakil. Ambassador Amar
Mushtaq Zargar, I think.
Mushtaq Latram and Mushtaq Latram
And Saeed, what was his name? The Karachi. Omar Saeed. The killer of.
And I remember distinctly watching that because I was Vice Chancellor of the University of Jammu, and these people had been taken from Kot Balwal jail through the good offices of Mr. A.S. Dullat, who had persuaded Farooq Abdullah to let them go. And Jaswant Singh Ji, in fact, along with some of those who are still in holding offices, went there, handed it over, and personally to talk to. I remember that conversation with Foreign Minister Mutawakil. I can't think of a lower point than that today, as India seems to be really having virtually no cards left in Afghanistan. The fact is that today you could virtually read on a Twitter line that the Battle of Kandahar is almost lost, if it's not already lost. What's the latest on Kandahar? But Kandahar is about to be captured by the Taliban. Forecasts range from weeks to days to at most a month before, if present circumstances persist, before the Taliban will have occupied Kabul. And unlike when India was a protector and a supporter of the Northern Alliance, the Mazar will fall. I mean, I can't think of a worse fate where the Lion of Panjshir, amateur Masood, used to call all the shots, and that Mazar will fall. All our development projects will come to a knot, whether it is the investment in scholarships or the Zanana parks or the highway which connected the west of Afghanistan to the north to the Ammu Darya, eventually, hopefully, you're expected. How did we get here? I mean, it's academics have the freedom to say that, look, we told you so, we can't take responsibility. Civil servants can't afford that. You have to, you'll have to tell us why are we in this blighted situation where we seem to have lost all cards. It's okay that people said, oh, you should have reached out to the Taliban. Even my friend Rustam Shah Mahmood, who was the last, one of the last ambassadors before the Taliban took over and had a direct connection with Mullah Amar, had talked about India reaching out to the Taliban because the Taliban had a terrible experience with the ISI. Mullah Zarif and others had talked about it in his book, but the contradictions were not so obvious. Today, even people like that MI6 operative who was married to a Pakistani wife, I forget his name, has explicitly said that this Taliban is much more dangerous than Taliban 1.0. They're coming with a degree of triumphalism. They believe that they've defeated the Americans now. Their connections with the Al-Qaeda remain intact. The ISIS is active in parts of Afghanistan. We couldn't have got it worse. And all this was dependent, in some ways, if you want to be reductionist, because we put all our eggs in the American basket. We had hoped that the Americans will subsidize our soft power within Afghanistan, and that somehow we had made inroads into Afghan society by showing serials which used to make the clock stop in every Afghan home, including make Minister Smriti Irani a household name in Afghanistan. But tell me I am wrong. That's why, in some ways, this is a prophecy of doom, and yet a request for our enlightened ambassadors and former decision maker to tell me how that I am wrong, that it's not as bad as it seems. Let me stop there, because I will want to intervene after each one of you speaks, just to perhaps critique you if you'd give me that privilege. So, what is the order, sir? Is this Ambassador Mukhopadhyay, Dr. Shakti Sinha, and Ambassador Amar Sinha? 10 minutes, sir, and I'm a strong timekeeper. It's 11:20 now.
Thank you, Amitabh. Thank you, Manish, for inviting me to this event. And of course, it's a privilege to be with Professor Mattoo as well as my very distinguished colleagues, on the panel. My successor, Amar, Shakti, who had been there as part of the UN before me, and also, I believe, a very distinguished audience. Now, I'm not so sure if I start answering the questions that have been posed by both Manish and Amitabh Mattoo, I'll probably veer off my script completely. So let me, in the 10 minutes that I have, just actually make my key points, and then I will try and address those issues as well as I can. Firstly, I think this whole issue of what is the Taliban objective? Is it the end of foreign occupation, or is it something else? I think it's now very clear. It was perhaps clear to many of us even earlier that foreign occupation was only an excuse for the Taliban and perhaps their backers in Pakistan as well, that the real objective of the Taliban was the imposition of an Islamic emirate, and that their real targets were post-born modern Afghanistan. If it had been only foreign occupation, the matter should have ended now. But in fact, we actually see that this is the beginning of what they intend to achieve. Second is, on the military balance, I would say definitely round one was with the Taliban. But in round two, notwithstanding Kandahar, there is resistance. There was political lack of unity and cohesion. With the wolves at the door, I think there is a greater urgency to remain united and take sort of more consensual decisions. There was military disarray with the absence of a defense minister for a long time, but with the appointment of Bismillah Khan, a veteran, commander of Ahmad Shah Massoud, I think we'll be back to fighting an Afghan war in an Afghan way rather than a NATO way. And I think I would like to give it a chance. Many of the former jihadi leaders are coming back to the battlefield. And more than anything else, the difference between 1996 and 2021 is in 1996, the Taliban were perceived in Afghanistan as, religious students from the madrasas of the refugee camps in Pakistan, led by a religious leader, respected religious leader, Mullah Umar, who were going to stabilize Afghanistan after the very bitter internecine fighting, intra-Mujahideen internecine fighting. Today, they are perceived in large measure as a kind of proxy terrorist force of the Pakistanis. And whatever their military control may be, largely in the countryside and in some strategic locations, they do not have public support. They do not have the political support of the Afghan people. After 40 years, lots of Afghans are very tired and are making peace, a kind of tactical peace, rather than see a kind of massacre by the Taliban. But on the question of whether the Taliban have changed or not, I think we are already witness to the fact that whatever the sophistication of the leadership in Doha, whatever their their valuation of international relations, the improvement of the brilliance of their strategic communications, and also the fact of their tactical military leadership, the fact that they should follow a strategy that has 4 parts. One is that control of the northern provinces so that Central Asia does not become a bridgehead for recovery of Afghanistan by resistance or foreign forces. Secondly, control over the strategic highways, particularly its choke points. Thirdly, capture as much territory that is indefensible for the ANDSF as possible, that is in the countryside. Fourthly, a strategic narrative that sort of supports that by giving the impression that all of Afghanistan is falling. And fifthly, by trying to sort of more or less surround many of the key towns. And of course, particular value of that was in Kandahar. So I think, foreign occupation was not their objective. Their objective is to remove what one Taliban leader said in a closed talk, all vestiges of foreign influence, which basically means Afghans who have taken to the liberal order post-2021. Second is the question of whether the Taliban will just be confined to Afghanistan. That means, let's say, to paraphrase a term used for communism, emirates in one country as opposed to international emirates. The fact is that the Taliban have their links with many regional organizations in Central Asia, in Pakistan, including organizations that take India as their target. And at the same time, they have also their links with international organizations, Al-Qaeda, and others, and at least factions of others. So I don't think that the impact of the Taliban will be limited to Afghanistan. It will have a demonstration effect amongst fundamentalist, extremist, radical, and terrorist forces who are in any case birds of the same feather, or at best in-laws who they cannot refuse shelter or entry to their door. Definitely it will give a fillip to these currents of radical ideological thinking in the region. And it will also belie, I think, the American claim that that they will support American counter-terrorist objectives. The third is, what do we expect in the immediate near future? I frankly do not share Professor Mattoo's very, very pessimistic scenario. I feel that with the Afghan defense forces, as well as the jihadi leaders, as well as the popular backing that the Republic, Islamic Republic has, that they will certainly be able to hold out till the end of the fighting season. I think the crucial period will be between August and October, and that will give a certain time for possible negotiations. I'm very surprised that, in fact, the UN Security Council has not yet taken cognizance of this attempt by the Taliban to take over Afghanistan militarily. And I feel that perhaps India, as a member of the Security Council right now, should maybe take the lead in trying to convene a resolution, or trying to mobilize international opinion in favor of, against a military takeover, in favor of a ceasefire, and in particular in favor of a negotiated political settlement, in which certain red lines, including delisting, the sanctions, and others, should be should be conditional. International recognition should be conditional on a negotiated political settlement that is a fair negotiated political settlement. And let it be very clear that India's best options would be towards such a negotiated political settlement. Fourth is the question of, also in the military balance, I would like to say that as the competition or as the contest between the ANDSF and the Taliban, comes to the towns, the Taliban will not really be able to hold towns. In many cases, what they have done is they have overrun population centers to extend their front lines, but they have not been actually able to hold ground, or let alone govern at this point of time. And it is very unlikely that a lightly armed infantry insurgent force will be able to completely overpower a much stronger army, even though this army is a very limited army, an army limited to basically a counter-terrorist ability or maximum degree of counter-insurgency ability. The NATO mission, the US NATO mission, did not invest in a proper national army with artillery, armor, capable of holding territory. And this they did at the behest of Pakistan. There were other reasons too, at the fact that the US had a limited purpose for counterterrorism and to a certain extent counterinsurgency. The fact that it would have cost much more than developing a special forces counterterrorist army. And most of all, it was because they placated Pakistan in not providing and not investing in an Afghan national army. I mean, the failures of the US and the West are many. They include a complete lack of strategic investment in Afghanistan, but we don't have the time to go into it right now. I will just end with, I think, what is the position of China and the United States. The position of China is still enigmatic. I think its immediate interests are to be able to control a spillover into Xinjiang, which it hopes to be able to do with an understanding with its relationship with Pakistan and its understanding with the Taliban. China's success in being able to control, rebellious outfits in its own country has been quite successful. So we should assume that, they will be able to create a little buffer around Xinjiang and possibly may even succeed in that. But their long-term objectives, I think, are much more oriented towards a strategic outreach towards the Gulf to tie up with the 400 billion, 25 million, geo-economic deal with strategic overtones that they have with Iran as a Western outlet to the pressure that they face in the Indo-Pacific in the form of the Quad. But American, intentions are a little more cryptic and mysterious. It is baffling to think that the Americans should cede space in Afghanistan in the soft underbelly of its two principal strategic rivals, both Russia and particularly in the weakest underbelly of China in Sinha. So my feeling there, and this is a hypothesis that I float, is that perhaps actually this entire deal that we have seen is to bring the Taliban back and to create an environment of instability in Afghanistan that will act as a check against both Russians as well as in particular the Chinese. In other words, we may have ended the military war on the part of the US, but an intelligence war might now begin. I've run out of time, so I'm not going to touch on India, but I think in the question answer, we can discuss that further. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Mukhopadhyay, for those extremely wise words. And I do think that I was deliberately being provocative, and I think you added the necessary caveats to make it a more wholesome, provide us with a more wholesome picture. However, yesterday I was in a conference which was of just international relations theorists with Joseph Nye and others, and my voice, I'm told, is not clear. Is my voice clear now?
We can hear you, but you're not loud enough. We can hear you.
I don't know what I can do, but I hope it'll improve.
Yeah, you're clear.
Okay.
Yeah, you're audible.
One of the challenges, of course, is to see how declining hegemons behave. Now, there isn't sufficient evidence, but the evidence from Germany and Britain is that often declining hegemons behave in irrational, impractical, short-sighted ways. And if you see America as a declining hegemon, then its behavior in Afghanistan, which, as you said, in the face of it, right where you're playing, where there is a kind of new great game being played out, you're just withdrawing. It seems baffling and puzzling and inscrutable, but I wouldn't put too much wisdom within the State Department or its other agencies. But let me stop there and ask Dr. Shakti Sinha, who was there with Prime Minister Vajpayee when the Cabinet Committee on Security decided to have the passengers released in IC-814. Incidentally, the person who I was referring to was Michael Semple. I think the two ambassadors who know this well. Michael Semple now teaches in Ireland, but he was quite clearly a modern-day Lawrence of Arabia kind of figure, married to a Pakistani, and was helping the Taliban at some stage, and was declared persona non grata by, I think, President Karzai. Dr. Sinha.
Thank you very much, Mattoo. After Gautam's very detailed this thing, let me just take up three issues. The first is the military scenario, obviously. Now, initially, the Taliban was really gaining ground very fast. Then they made some very interesting moves. And I will slightly deviate a little bit from what Gautam said, in the sense that they started controlling the border points, not just to prevent access, but because border points represent a lot of revenue. So they took in the north. Again, people don't associate the north with Taliban. They're wrong in that sense. They took Sher Khan Bandar, pushed the Afghan soldiers into Tajikistan, took Heratan, took the biggest border crossing of Afghanistan, which is Islam Kala, on the road to Mashhad from Herat. Then, of course, the south was always with them, so the Jaram High was always under their control. Then Spin Boldak, and of course, Torkham is always contested. The idea was to choke the Afghan government also of revenues and of supplies. However, in the last few weeks, they have not only, am I clear?
Yeah.
Okay. In the last few weeks, not only have they stopped their aggression, they've actually vacated a number of districts, justifying it that it's not worth holding on to the district. There are no resources in these districts, so not worth it in hospitable areas. I suspect it's not just these reasons, not just the brave fight put up by the ANSF, which I'm a little skeptical about, also because Pakistan's deep, what should I say, unease at the developments. If suddenly the emirate comes back, it puts Pakistan in a difficult situation. The quad of Pakistan, Iran, Turkey, and Iran was not there. Pakistan, Turkey, Russia, and China. The foreign ministers got a statement saying they do not want to see the restoration of the Emirates. Then when Turkey was asked to take over the airport and embassies, Taliban objected. A war of words has started between Turkey and the Taliban. which Erdogan referring to the Taliban as a foreign occupying power in Afghanistan. You can see that things are not the same. Pakistan, in any case, realizes that with America out of Afghanistan, Pakistan has no stakes left in the game. I mean, the Americans will not keep funding them, keep not supporting them. Therefore, they've started to talk about geoeconomics, not geopolitics. So, Pakistan riding a tiger, and the fact is the Taliban would not be here but for Pakistan. Riding a tiger is one thing, get off of tiger. Go back to 2001. You would remember that the Americans wanted to go bombing. They expected a slower takeover through a negotiation other process under Pakistani influence. But the northern land just swept through Kabul and even reached Kandahar, upended the game. So you can start these wars, but you really can't control them. And all these countries, therefore, while wanting to embarrass America, really loving this embarrassment of America, the America has been defeated. So Iran is happy, Russia is happy, China is happy, Pakistan is happy. But they realize that the cost of this victory may be a little too much for themselves to bear. Taliban, of course, has assured China, we will not allow our territory to be used for the transit of Uyghurs to Turkestan and Xinjiang. We will not allow it. They've said that. They said again and again to others also, because China is ultimately the biggest backer of Pakistan, and Taliban would not do anything to embarrass China. So therefore, the military front, yes, it's not as grim as it is grim, of course, but it is not, Kabul is not about to fall immediately. So we can, but trouble will continue. ISIS is a spoiler. Nobody is really sure what the ISIS is. Initially, it was a sort of front for Taliban. Possibly not. Possibly it is Pakistan's insurance policy in case the Taliban do not act as per Pakistani orders, which is likely to happen because anybody in power would like agency, would not like to be seen as being dictated by an outside power. The second point is, of course, very, very important, is India and the Taliban. Are the Taliban good people? Are they bad people? In the world of real politics, I do not see countries talking to each other on the basis of whether the other side is good or bad, or the other side even has popular legitimacy or not. We never asked the Chinese Communist Party to win elections or the North Koreans. That's never a concern. We have been best friends with Assad after his murderous attack on the homes in 1982, where he killed tens of thousands of his own countrymen. We have always been comfortable with dictators. So I don't see any reason why. But the bogey or the dark cloud of IC-814 obviously has bothered us a little beyond. And yes, Taliban is Pakistani controlled in large sense, that obviously not. But should you allow the Taliban to be purely Pakistani controlled? That is one question India should address very, very carefully. The second part of this Taliban thing is that Karzai started outreach to the Taliban years ago through the British initially. That's where Mr. Michael Semple was also involved in that. And then he had to be thrown out because it became public. And he traveled to Helmand, etc. Is the fact he talked to a shopkeeper in Kandahar who pretended to be a Taliban. Then, of course, established contact with Mullah Baradar, for which Baradar paid a very steep price. Ghani from day one has been saying, I want to talk to the Taliban. They even began talks which turned out to be a fraud talks. But the fact is that the Afghan government has been desperate to talk to the Taliban. The Taliban has refused to talk to the Afghan government till now. So talking to the Taliban for India, you should be talking to everybody in the game. Whether it's Nepal or Afghanistan, we should not be seen as having favorites. Because if the situation changes, you cannot see all your efforts go down the drain and cede this big space to Pakistan. India must be there in whichever form, and therefore you must engage with everybody across. The world has been talking to Taliban. The Americans signed an agreement. We say Islamic Emirate, we don't recognize it, but we are signing an agreement nevertheless with it. The British facilitated that agreement, persuaded the Americans that the Pakistanis are trustworthy. The Nordics wanted to host the peace conference. China has been hosting the Taliban. Iran has been hosting. I think Amar Sinha went to Moscow for the peace talks. They were not peace talks, that was a peace conference which Russia had convened. The world has been talking to them. Our talking to them does not give them any extra recognition. Be very clear. Yes, we should have started this process when the Taliban needed us, not when we need the Taliban. I think that was, a little bit of fraud on this side. Going forward, it is difficult to predict. It's always difficult to predict the future. But because the way the situation is changing, the way, does the Taliban have enough agency or not? Will they be allowed agency or not? the fact that Pakistan is sending its own fighters and its own people, embedding them in Taliban units, does convey a deep sense of confusion, a deep sense of unease, that each side is not trusting the other enough. After all, the Taliban leadership is either in the Pakistani custody or the families are in custody. That is the level of trust they have with each other. But Taliban obviously cannot exist without Pakistan. How much will the ANSF hold on? Should they not be beefed up so that they put them in a better position to negotiate? At the end of the day, negotiating table strength matters. So negotiating for a position of complete weakness, tragedy. I wish the Murray talks of 2015 had actually gone through, though we found out Mullah Omar was dead. Because that at that moment, with massive US presence there, the talks could have gone much more favorable towards developing a more democratic Afghanistan rather than emirate that seems to be coming. I think, as I said, India should remain engaged, should not lose hope, and yet be realistic of the fact that at this moment, we do not have too many cards on the table. I'll stop here. I want to listen to others and, of course, answer the question answers. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Shakti Sinha. Of course, I fundamentally disagree with you on engaging with the Taliban, because I believe in this region, particularly our region, the moment you start making a distinction between interests and values, you will have Frankensteins all over. Talibanization is a serious danger. I mean, America can disconnect, Britain can disconnect. You have oceans and miles away, and you can sign off Afghanistan and its problems to the Afghan people and the neighborhood. But India doesn't have that luxury. At the Taliban and the dictators we dealt with in the Cold War period were communist-backed dictators who were actually, many of them, including Saddam Hussein, including were Baathists, and who were actually keeping the genie under control. Here you are dealing with a force which is which the Pakistanis, I admit, will find difficult to control. But if India starts to negotiate, other than purely tactical reasons, you want to break the Taliban, you want to ensure that their potency is much less to create havoc and damage, yes, go ahead, do that. But if you think that you can build a strategic alliance with the Taliban, that's where fundamentally. Yeah.
I'll answer you at the end.
Okay. And I think now we go to Ambassador Amar, who actually has been most engaged in parts of the reconciliation process. He was there at the conference hosted by Moscow, and he's been a member of the National Security Advisory Board. So we look towards him for his words of wisdom or helping us to explain what are our cards in Afghanistan, sir.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. After these two distinguished speakers, I don't know what else to add. So maybe I can at best tell you how I see it. But one correction, my NSAB tenure is ended in December, so I'm a free citizen now. But I keep following Afghanistan because of personal interest. See, largely what both my predecessors have spoken, I would agree with that. But let us try and understand that what is the current narrative and why that is happening. It is actually good to understand why things happen. No, this entire narrative was built. The Taliban has changed. It's willing to engage in peace. It's willing to share power, and it'll bring peace to Afghanistan. Obviously, these were the assumptions on which the Americans proceeded with the engaging Taliban. But they had a clear objective. American objective was that I'll engage and I would get an assurance or an agreement, which will be the basis of my sort of orderly withdrawal of Afghanistan. So that was the reason why they sort of started supping with the devil, so to say. And I think I entirely agree that if at Murray process 2015, I think Afghan government and Americans had much stronger cards in their hand. And once they got driven by the electoral sort of schedule in the US, and of course under a president who changed his mind fairly often, both about people and policies, things became difficult. So they gave in too much. So what we saw in the last 2 years was there's a huge buildup of Taliban, both diplomatically and of course people started hedging. Once America started the trend everybody, what I call bandwagoning, they all started jumping that this is the new story, this is the new future of Afghanistan, and we all have to engage, otherwise we will miss the bus. And this has often been said in Indian media that India seems to be out, not on the table, out of the picture, missing the bus, all your investments are sinking. Well, this is part of the narrative building. The other narrative, of course, which I think it is used more to rile India, is that somehow Pakistan has won and India has lost. I know the Indian public opinion gets very agitated at this. They also forget that it never was an India-Pakistan battle in Afghanistan. It was a battle and a war that Pakistan waged against US and the West. And it is really for them to sort of take account whether they lost or they won. Uh, and when you said that why is it the lowest power point that India has reached, we can discuss this when we come to question and answer. But a few realities of Afghanistan we have to understand. You see, when we went in 2001, also, I don't think that Afghanistan was created by us. No, Afghanistan has a much longer history. When people talk to today as if Taliban is the framework or the template for Afghanistan history or Afghanistan governance, they forget that Taliban itself was an aberration. It was a 5-year aberration which was imposed on Afghanistan. And that seems to be the current template, that if it is not a democratic system, we have to necessarily go back to Taliban. So at one level, it is just pure power grab of certain different groups of elites. We have seen that whether it was Northern Alliance before or through elections. But what you have really seen that this is a fight between ethnicities, between tribes. Also, there is a urban-rural divide in Afghanistan. We will have to really understand that to see why what is happening, because there is Afghanistan is a very sort of conservative society. So at some level, there is perhaps a lot of, I would say, sympathy, but definitely an understanding for what Taliban says in terms of the basic Islamic values. Of course, the problem with Taliban is that it's trying to impose a certain interpretation of Islam, which is completely alien to Afghan culture, to its ethos, etc. So that is the basic fight. The basic fight is how do you choose to live? Is it within a government? And as somebody said, that any form of government, whether it's a theocracy, Iran has a different model. We have fairly good relations with Iran. And I don't think we have taken an ideological position. But of course, I entirely agree with Professor Mattoo that negotiating with Taliban has to have very clear objectives. What is it that we want? I don't think, and we will have to, once we approach that, we will have to distinguish between the ideology of Taliban and the individuals in the movement of Taliban. You can break the individuals and win over some of them, like we did with the Mujahideen. Mujahideens were not friends of India. They were exactly in the same situation that Taliban finds itself today. That they lived in for 10 years in Pakistan. They were totally funded, supported, aided by them. But they were fighting for a cause, which was a national cause, liberating their country. Taliban of today, unfortunately, it is a pure power game. You see, when we compare it to 1990s, Taliban then was seen as as a force which was trying to end civil war, a fratricidal war in Afghanistan, which was happening. There was an element of piety involved because of the persona of Mullah Omar, etc. Today, all that is gone. Many of these Taliban leaders are hardcore businessmen. Some of the commanders are purely drug dealers, and they have their entire fiefdoms on which it runs. So they are fighting not necessarily to impose a certain ideology, but they are fighting to retain their economic fiefdoms. And as Ghani always keeps saying, that the conflict economy is so huge, and there's so many stakeholders, and that actually gives you hope that if actually a centralized Taliban government were to come closer to power, you will see fracturing both for the competition within Taliban for getting plum positions, like you saw after the last two contested elections, or even in defying the state in terms of surrendering the assets and the mines and the wealth that you have accumulated. because that all will have to be centralized, and that may or may not happen. Today, because you are fighting battles in different provinces, it is all right. It is like a zamindari system that you collect the revenues, you send something up to the shuras for their global expenses, and the rest you keep. Now that will end if it is to run like a normal state. Manish made a very interesting point in terms of the financials. The reality of Afghanistan is that if you look at the last 200 years of its history, it has never been financially independent. No, there was a time when all these raids that happened in India, in Delhi, etc., these were economic raids. They came for resources, they came for food, they even took away women. And this, I'm not saying that Afghans of today will do that or Taliban even will do that, but this is how they have depended. Through the 18th and 19th century, British used to have a stipend paid to Kabul. Then the Soviets came in. Then the Americans have come in. And there are people who have estimated that if you actually adjusted it to today's value, that even today, Afghanistan, which is of course much larger population today, would need $5 to $6 billion of annual assistance from outside. Now, will Taliban in government be able to get that? My answer, I think, would be no, because Taliban, the way it is going, while it has had spectacular military success, but let us not forget that their downfall was equally sort of dramatic. It took maybe 100 CIA operatives and the Northern Alliance, and a regime which had lasted for 5 years and had total control at least on the 90%, and which they are claiming that they have 85% of territory under their control, took exactly a month to collapse, and they had to disappear. For 5 years, nobody saw or knew where they were. So things do change, and that's the nature of the topography. But the problem with what will happen is that uh, but let me come to the other question. While of course as a strategy they have done very well, what they have done is they have taken over the custom post, which is a source of revenue. But that denies revenue to Afghan government and starves it of essential supplies, including petroleum products, which are all imported from Central Asia. And without petroleum products, Afghanistan military cannot operate. It is as simple as that. But that it will become a revenue source for Taliban, I do not agree, because international trade does not allow any group to run custom posts. Custom posts, as we know, has two governments on both sides, and there is a formal trading arrangements. So what will happen is that formal trade will have to stop, because I cannot allow my citizens to trade with a group which I do not recognize, which is running a customs authority. So that we should not worry about that. It will become a revenue source for Taliban, not yet. And that is the point I hope the Afghan government is making very clear to its neighbors. It is Pakistan may or may not agree, because what will happen is there will be a lot of smuggling, and smuggling is a crime in any case, and it's for each government to enforce that it doesn't happen and the citizens don't indulge in smuggling. Uh, Taliban's links, I think, it has been made very clear by the Taliban spokesman by now that no links with Muslims. They don't say terror groups. That no links between Muslims would be reduced, and they are under no obligation, and there's no commitment. In fact, he gave a very brazen sort of an interview to Polo News. So if somebody care to read it, it'll be very clear how their thinking is. But some of the things that is happening, and I entirely agree that the Afghan security forces have been taken completely by surprise. Basically, the complete withdrawal of the logistics support has left them uh, very deeply sort of hampered in their management or their movements. And obviously, they had not prepared for a scenario where they will not have to rely on this, but they will have to relearn their tactics and their strategy, and have to really fight an Afghan war. Now, if the Taliban can come on 20 motorcycles, I don't see why. Sorry, I didn't realize that my video had gone off. So this extra dependence on air support alone is something which was the NATO doctrine, which was sort of given to them and their training. So all this has to change, and it will need some time. For the time being, Afghan security forces will be assisted by the community mobilization that is happening. I think government has appealed to all the strong men and different tribal elders to mobilize and to coordinate, and that resistance will grow. It will go not because of great patriotism, which will be an element, but it will also grow because of the excesses of Taliban. And I could only cite you would have seen what they have told about unmarried women or widows. Uh, and this is a very, very touchy issue in Afghanistan. What they are really trying to cloak is that they are unable to control their Taliban fighters from going into villages and going on a rampage. We know that they demand sort of night halts, they demand food. Obviously, now they would also started looking at women. So the Taliban has come out with a very sort of fig leaf of asking clerics to drop the list. So they are basically giving it a religious color under the interpretation that as if it'll be a service that people will be doing or a sacrifice they'll be doing for the cause of jihad. So this is going to backfire. And women is a very, very extremely sensitive issue in a society like Afghanistan. In fact, you would have seen even the Taliban had to criticize what happened in Islamabad when the daughter of the Afghan ambassador was abducted. Uh, so, so these are all signs I see that things are changing. Even diplomatically, if you now look at what Quad is saying, what Mr. Wangi said in Dushanbe, you can see that people are getting extremely concerned. While they were very happy that the Americans are leaving, but they are now deeply concerned that Taliban as an Islamic emirate too looks like a likelihood. So Mr. Wangi has said that, in fact, he has very interestingly called the Taliban a significant military force. I don't know because they are still hesitant to calling them a terrorist organization. But however, he has also told them that you should have solid Muslim values or system, but eschew all radical ideology. Uh, I will stop here. In terms of India, of course, more than Afghan infiltrators coming in, I don't think Afghans themselves hold an animosity. It is the ideology, the idea that such radical thought can infect India, I think to me is more worrying than the actual physical fight of infiltration, etc. And that is why I said that while we negotiate with Taliban, we should be very clear that we don't accept the ideology of Taliban. Of course, the individuals, they are Afghans. Once they come back to civilian life, like many other Taliban leaders, we should definitely engage them, befriend them, and also hope to mold them. And I entirely agree. They also resent being left at the mercy of Pakistan alone. In fact, they at least ask us that why is it that India sort of eschews them completely, and that is something that we need to correct. So I'll stop here and answer the questions because both Gautam, I think, and they give you the larger picture of what is happening. Thank you.
Thank you.
Can't hear you.
You are muted.
Can
Amitabh,
you
you're
hear me
muted.
now?
Now you can hear you. Yeah.
Yeah, loud and clear. Is that loud and
Now,
clear? Yeah. I spend much of my time, as Manish knows, in Australia. And given the appropriate analogy, would be how Australia closed all its borders in a way to prevent the COVID virus from entering Australia. However, they're locked down as we speak in Melbourne, in Sydney, in Brisbane. So I wish we could have the luxury of thinking that the Taliban, as a fighting force or as a antediluvian ideology, will not impact on us. Unfortunately, I cannot afford to be as uh, rest in that luxury, given that I live also part of the time in Kashmir. However, uh, uh, one suggestion made, which I think everyone in this panel must reflect upon, is that when the Taliban first took over, or before they took over, there was at least an Indian engagement with something called the Northern Alliance. And the great pillar of the Northern Alliance was the great Tajik leader, Ahmad Shah Massoud, the Lion of Panjshir, but also General Dostum and others, and Abdullah was the secretary to Massoud. Now, we did not obviously follow up on trying to retain even some core remnants of that Northern Alliance. Bruce Rydell and others in America have suggested, or I think, that India, if it can, should use its Air Force to at least demonstrate its willingness to use air power. And if you're saying that in any case the Taliban can't hurt us directly by coming in and fighting against us, so what prevents us from actually demonstrating or signaling that we're ready to go that, we're ready to cross that self-imposed Lakshman Rekha as we did when we crossed the LOC, by going outside our territory, outside our comfort zone, and bombing the Taliban if they are unwilling to negotiate or talk to us or threaten our interests. Provocative question. I want the panel to reflect on this and ask, Mukho, if you could begin.
Yeah. Okay. In fact, a number of issues have been thrown up, and let me just start by saying that I'm in the happy position of entirely sharing, Amar's presentation right now, and also your view on talking to the Taliban, and differing, of course, from Shakti on only that point. So let me also address the other issues that have been raised, and also perhaps cover some of the points that I was not able to cover in the 10 minutes that I had. So on this question of the Air Force, this is a very interesting suggestion. And I certainly think that in the menu of options that we have in support of the Afghan state at the present moment, we have something called a strategic partnership agreement. That strategic partnership agreement does involve a defense relationship. Pakistan has always feared a Western front against them, which over several wars we have never utilized. At one stage, we even had a detachment in NE. Certainly, we should keep the Western front alive as an option. And if that means that if we can step up our military support to the ANDSF, is certainly an option that I think should be open on the table for discussion. We should also remember that the international context has changed. By the way, this is not entirely new. In 2011, after we signed the Strategic Partnership Agreement, I think the Afghans were fairly conscious that the Americans were building a purely counter-terrorist special forces kind of army. And they did approach us for more advanced equipment, particularly artillery, because at that time there was a lot of shelling of the border areas from Pakistan, and they wanted to be able to just show some retaliation, at least just for their self-respect, if not for actually countering the Pakistanis. We had our own limitations and we were not able to proceed. But given the situation now, I think this is an option that should be on the table. This is one. Second, on the question of talks with the Taliban, I have to say that, look, I think it's all fair in love and war to talk to the Taliban, to explore what they can offer us in terms of security of our missions, of our projects, this, that, and the other. And also, if possible, wean away certain factions from the Taliban. But we should be really realistic about what we can achieve. Let's say that we strike a deal with one faction of the Taliban. How can we be sure? In fact, I would put the odds very much against it, that Pakistan or the Haqqani network or any of the other factions that are completely irreconcilable with India will not sabotage any agreement that we enter with any faction of the Taliban virtually overnight, including the security of your missions. So even if you strike a deal with a faction, there is no way that you're going to be able to depend on it. Second is the question of what is the context of the deal? The US and others have struck a deal behind the back of the Afghan government in their own interests, in the same logic of real interest. I totally agree with you that values should remain there. And struck a direct deal with the Taliban. I think talking to the Taliban in the context of peace talks is very much in order. Talking to the Taliban to explore options in terms of security as well as weaning them from Afghanistan is in order. But let us be under no delusions about what we can achieve. And thirdly, and most important, is it worth betraying your friends with whom you actually share those values for two birds in the Pakistani bush? In other words, one bush in the Indian garden for two birds in the Pakistani bush. I think on all these points, we should be very circumspect and cautious on dealing with the Taliban. On the question of financials, very interesting. On the question of 3 billion investment. Look, 3 billion physical investment is nothing. I think it's the investment that we have made in people. All those thousands of scholarship students in India, people who've reached positions of ministership and deputy ministership, we must not abandon them. I think this is the fundamental. Let the United States abandon all those they have nurtured for the last 20 years. But we should not make the mistake. The United States has had a flip-flop policy on Afghanistan all along, partly because it has had no strategic interest in Afghanistan after the Soviets withdrew. But we have had a consistent policy. Let us not at this moment feel that we are so weak as to dump all that for something else. And on that point, strengths and weaknesses, we are not so weak. Please don't forget that the Taliban are primarily Pashtuns. The Pashtuns' historical relationship, its commercial relationship, has entirely been with India. People talk about military campaigns, but let's not forget that on trade, the Grand Trunk Road was built by Sher Shah Suri, an Afghan based in India, connecting the Pashtun areas with mainland India. And let's not forget that in the world of culture, we've just had a person like Dilip Kumar, who has left. Who does not remember Afghan moneylenders and traders all over North India in the past? Let's even sentimental talk about the Taliban. So Pashtuns, more than anyone else, have an investment in India, both in terms of trade as well as culture, as well as, historically. And they would, as Pashtuns, as Taliban, to the extent that they have not been completely deracinated by Pakistan, they will retain this. In my time, I came across at least half a dozen Bengali women married to Pashtuns in Khost. In other words, that relationship, Kabuliwala relationship, was continuing in 2012-13. And another thing, ultimately the Taliban ideology. Actually, there are many people amongst the Taliban who know that Pakistan has hijacked the Deoband, the Deoband school of Islam towards radical ends and brought it much closer to the Saudi version of Wahhabism. There are many Afghan Taliban who would give a hand to be able to pursue Islamic studies in Deoband. Now, whether our government is bold enough to take or use such a strategy is another matter. But the fact is that senior Taliban leaders have approached the Afghan government indirectly in the past to be able to facilitate Islamic studies in Deoband. So it's not that we do not have cards. We have cards. We can use those cards anytime we want.
Do I take on?
1 second. I just want to respond to him 1 second. And I said, I completely agree with Mukho on this point. Yes. One disastrous mistake is to abandon your friends. Is to follow the American policy of use and throw. India has not done that easily in the past. It should not do so in the future. We shouldn't abandon our traditional friends, including within the Pashtuns. Remember, Jalaluddin Rumi to Khan, Abdul Ghaffar Khan, are all Afghans. The greatest tradition of Sufi tradition was also within parts of Balkhi and Afghanistan. So it's important to reinforce that we are for the Afghan people and build alliances rather than succumb to the most medieval antediluvian forces just because somehow they're going to get into power. Shakti sir.
Amitabh, just one very important point that I want to make, which I overlooked, which is, this question of past and future. I find it extremely difficult to believe. Last time the Taliban lasted 5 years. Maybe it was an accident of 9/11 that got the reversal possible. But I find it extremely difficult to believe that liberty can be suppressed forever. And the spirit of freedom will be there. There is a new generation in Afghanistan. This new generation is the future. And I think we should back the new generation, not the past.
Okay. Very quickly, 3-4 points. One, of course, yes, we should not abandon our friends. We abandoned them in 1979, and the Pashtuns have not forgiven you for that even today. When the communists took over, you sided with the Soviet Union. We have abandoned them already. And that's why today we are relying on remnants of the northern lands, which actually doesn't exist. None of them can pick up a gun now. It's sad, but that is true. Of course, among the friends that we have abandoned or not abandoned, the gentleman that Amar Sinha met in Moscow, stunning sight, Taliban leader, NDA, IMA. 5 years in India, and he's a Taliban leader. Don't see everything from the Indian eyes. See it from the Afghan eyes. One, the democratic system set up did not function. The elections of 2009 were disputed. Possibly Karzai would still have won it. The next elections were definitely wrong. Kerry had to fly twice to sort it out, and they could not issue the results, even though they declared Ghani as the victor. And the last election was a complete farce. If your friends decide to make a farce of the democratic system, why blame the people of Afghanistan for believing this? The Afghan government always had legitimacy, did not have credibility because it couldn't deliver on security. Today, unfortunately, our friends have lost credibility, legitimacy also. So that is a situation we have to face. Let's not our problem. They have created it. They have to face it. Yes, we must help them. We must support them. Strengthen the armed forces in a light manner. Please remember, even in 2013, we refused to supply them weapons for fear that will reach the Taliban in any case. Why give weapons to the Afghan National Army or the military if it reaches the Taliban? That's the logic then.
Correct.
Today is much worse.
No, that was not the logic then. We just simply
anyway, we did not supply. The fact is, did not supply. We'll not go into internal discussions, but this is my understanding. I'm happy to be wrong on that. We did not supply it. Now, are the Taliban changed? Are they good or the bad? I'm again saying that I do not agree with them at all. But that they're a legitimate player in Afghanistan, you must recognize. Whether you like it or not, they are there. Nehru refused to talk to the Naga rebels for a long time. Ultimately, Nagaland came into being, the Shillong Accord of 75 came into being, and negotiations are on. Mizoram, they killed the IG police, the SP, and many others. We used the Air Force, actually, in Mizoram. Ultimately, we talked to the MNF. We have talked to the Hurriyat. And we completely disgraceful people. Talk to them. Where is the question of our entering into an alliance with the Taliban? The fact is, you must be in conversation with them at least. Because as I said, you cannot abandon the Afghan people to Pakistan. I'm not talking to the Taliban, but in effect telling the Afghans, you are Pakistan's problem, we are not in the picture. But do not send, your Air Force cannot operate there because in between it's a country called Pakistan. How will you overfly Pakistan each time? And I don't think we should aggravate the situation by trying to militarily intervene in Afghanistan. That would be completely foolish. We should not even think of it. Bruce Riddle can sit in Washington and think about it. Taliban has changed a little bit. Badakhshan, which was the capital of the legal government, Rabbani's government, Faizabad was the capital those days. Today, Badakhshan is effectively controlled by the Taliban, who are not Pashtuns, but they are Badakhshis. There is one Hazara commander also apparently. And all over the non-Pashtun areas now, other than Bamiyan and possibly Daikunde, Taliban are there today. So Taliban in that sense, socially has changed. Leadership may still be very much this thing. The point I was trying to make was, and I remember Taliban leader Quetta Shura, I can't name him, talking to me last year on the Zoom call and said, अगर मुल्ला बरादर को आप नहीं मानोगे, 10 साल पाकिस्तान जेल में रहा, मार खाया उनसे, तो आप किससे बात कर सकते हो? I mean, fact is, Taliban is not a monolith. Yes, Pakistan will sabotage it, Haqqanis will sabotage it, but that should not stop us trying to befriend them. And Amar, I only disagree on you on that little point border post. The fact is, for 2 years after 2001, Ismail Khan controlled Islam Kalan, making money from there. Government of Afghanistan did not. Today, will Pakistan stop Taliban from using spin boldak? No, never. Will Iran stop Taliban? No. They're very happy to deal with the Taliban. So in that sense, yes, it is to choke supplies, but also make money in the bargain. Not a major point. Soft power has limitations. Pakistanis love Hindi movies. Does the state of Pakistan love India? Answer is no. And lastly, Manish, I have a long paper on Afghanistan geographically as a rentier state. I presented it in Kabul 2015 or 16. I'm happy to share it with you. I'll stop there.
Mr. Amar Sinha, if you could respond to what your fellow panelists have said, as well as to the idea of using the Indian Air Force in a supportive role for the Afghan.
No, the idea is very good, except that, as Shakti says, that geography comes in the way. And when Indian Airlines and civilian aircrafts were denied overflight clearances, I don't think you can forcibly fly over Pakistan. But I would have a counter proposal in a sense that it's not an idea that we should completely reject. You see, the region and the world has been telling Americans that they are very worried at their sort of hasty departure or the irresponsible departure. They are also demanding that you please continue with your commitments in terms of financials, etc. So they also look for some sort of a US umbrella, including Mr. Erdogan, who wants to send troops to run Kabul airport, has said he wants diplomatic support, he wants financial support, and also he wants logistical support of the Americans if they were to take on this responsibility. Pakistan, while denying military bases to Americans who are looking for some presence in the region, did clarify that they have existing what they call GLOC, ground lines of control, and air lines of communication agreements, which have not been dumped. And for Americans to operate, unless it operates out of Central Asia, from anywhere else in the world, it will need permission from Pakistan to overfly. Now, if that being the case, if Pakistan is agreeable to American aircrafts flying, my proposition to Mr. Biden should be that as a newfound partnership, as that we are strategic partners in Quad with Americans, India should come forward that this is our common objective, a fight against terror, and we should be able to host American troops. And now, this is, I'm making a very, very controversial suggestion because there is no other place in the Gulf which is closer to Afghanistan than, say, north of India is. It takes 30 minutes for drones to reach or aircrafts to reach, and you can cover whole of North Afghanistan, and from, say, Gujarat coast, you can cover southern Afghanistan very, very easily. Now, this is an idea perhaps whose time has not come, and of course, I'm speaking in my personal capacity, but I would have done this to test two things. How strong is our own partnership with America? Or is our partnership unidimensional? Is it only focused on maritime domain, or does it also take into concerns where India's basic interests are sort of interlinked? And second, how strong is the commitment of the region and what Pakistan has been promising Americans that yes, they are partners in fight against terror, and this would test that. And whether Pakistan allows Americans or not, it's not for us to sort out. But at least we, as strategic partners, should be bold enough to do it. And there has been precedence. Shakti would know. Americans asked us when the Iraq War took place. We offered in 2001. It was not used. So even today, perhaps it will not be used. It will be seen as provocation. But at least that'll be in line with our common objectives. If what we are saying publicly is aligned with what we wish to achieve in Afghanistan. So I don't know if Mr. Bruce Riddle will consider that to have American Air Force here and they could go.
But yeah, I think your suggestion is really interesting. It would have been more reassuring if the Americans' policy on Afghanistan had been a little more reassuring in terms of staying on. But apparently, they're also seeking military bases in Uzbekistan and at the moment, so they may use that as well. But I'll conclude in this final point and hand over to Manish, who's going to do the Q&A. One of the lessons from history, from international relations theory, is when hegemons decline, one, there is of course unpredictability in the international system. The hegemon often behaves in erratic, irrational ways, but other countries turn revisionist. We are seeing aspiring hegemon like China turn belligerently revisionist. Let me put another counter provocative proposition. Now, the only road access was from as far as India is concerned, is from the Vagan corridor. Why can we not have, at least in terms of our ambitions and plans and military planning, at least the prospect of actually gaining access to the Vagan corridor again, through that to the Amar Darya and beyond? If we are going to emerge or thinking of being a major military power, an aspiring power, why can't we think big? After all, that is Pakistan occupied Kashmir. Why can't we think of reclaiming that? Now that we don't believe in Lakshman Rekhas, we can't depend on the Americans, there's no Russia to support us, the Chinese are on our backyard. Why is our strategic ambition so limited by being boxed in for all these years. Now, this is absolutely over the top kind of suggestion, and I know, and I think Gautam wants to react,
No.
but then after that, Manish, it's you. Over to you.
No, it's in. I think we've come up with a number of very bold ideas, and in many ways, I think they should, they should all be considered. They should all be on the table. But I would like to say that, in the more immediate term, I would like to sort of come back to a proposal that I made, is that, on the diplomatic table, India can take an initiative, or India and other like-minded countries can take an initiative in the UN Security Council to at least present a common front on the part of the international community on the red lines on a military takeover in Afghanistan, and actually smoke out any possible spoilers on that. If, for example, it is true that Pakistan and China are riding piggyback on each other, or could ride piggyback on each other, having noted Wang Yi's recent statement, in order to try and exploit Pakistan's eyes, ears, and influence in Afghanistan, and provided and use China's geo-economic muscle to be able to perhaps control Afghanistan even better. Some people might even say stabilize it. Then let them come out and say that no, a military takeover of Afghanistan by the Taliban is okay with us. A negotiated settlement can be dispensed with. And say that Taliban is once again a stabilizing force, and we back it. So I think this is a viable diplomatic option. And also the point that I made about it, about NEA field and defense, about utilizing the strategic partnership agreement is not necessarily to actually fight a war. It is to keep the Pakistanis looking over their shoulder towards their back, to keep them guessing. Or something that they feared, even though it has never actually happened. So if you finally overcome your inhibition in, let's say, I'm throwing up a wild idea. What about India-Afghan defense treaty like we had with the Soviet Union? What would be the impact of that? I am aware that today China is a player, and we have to calculate, we have to game all these things before we do that. But since we are putting radical ideas on the table, let me also place that.
Over to you now for the rest of the session. Please, thank you very much, all the panelists, and I think at least the only credit I can claim is to at least help float ideas which are provocative, radical, but certainly in accordance with the ambitions that we have as an emerging and a great power. I'll stop there now. I'll hand over it to Manish and look forward to the.
Yeah, thanks, Professor Mattoo. I think all very excellent presentations and very interesting ideas on the table. I hope MEA would also, I'm sure the esteemed panelists would also pass these ideas, these conversations to the current decision makers. But since we have just 5 minutes left for wrapping up, can we take just 3 questions? So we start with Soumya. And Soumya, please be very brief. And we take all the 3 questions in one go. Over to you, Soumya. Please unmute yourself and your question.
So thank you, sir. Thank you, everyone. I'm just too tempted to speak a lot, but I'll keep myself limited. But I just feel that whatever Ambassador Mukhopadhyay or other panelists have said, they both have pros and cons. We cannot go direct, we cannot rely only on soft power diplomacy. As Ambassador Mukhopadhyay said, that we have so much in harmony with the people of Afghanistan. But at the same time, what Shakti Sinha sir has said is also valid, that we cannot just leave the people of Afghan in lurch. We may not have promised them to fight for against the Taliban, but at this moment, whatever they are looking for, we are not even assuring them that much. And this is where I feel that we should not just look at soft power diplomacy. There should be some kind of a hard power diplomacy as well. And the Hind-Afghan Dosti, which we had initiated, should continue by giving them more, what you said about defense treaty. This is a good idea. And at the same time, about the Deoband scholars, it is a very important point. My PhD is on Deoband scholars in Afghanistan, Pakistan, and India. And I feel that the people in Afghanistan really want to come back to India and study in Deoband. That's the common voice of Afghanistan. So we should open those doors for them and not keep it only transactional like the people of America has done. The Americans were very transactional in their relations with Afghanistan for all these 20 years. So we should not follow the footsteps of America. Lastly, I also feel that it's too early to give the man of the match trophy to people of the Taliban, because they have just captured the rural areas and the urban areas are still under the control of the Afghan National Defense Security Forces. The best part is that this has been there in 1980s also, when Dr. Najibullah was managing to control Kabul and the urban areas for 3 years, when the Northern Alliance had sort of captured the rest of the areas. So we should not think on all those lines only. I'm just being too quick, so I can't explain completely, but I'm sure
yeah.
everybody has got my point. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Dr. Ladu, who is joining us from Rajasthan, Central Institute of Rajasthan faculty.
Hello, sir. Good morning. Sir, I have very specific two questions to Ambassador Mukhopadhyay, sir. One, that using India's military option in Afghanistan, I am very doubtful on that, because we already are facing 2.5 front war, and 2.5 fronts are already active. And if we go strategic alliance with other 4 countries in Quad, then this becomes 3.5 front war. Because and then if again we exploit our military options in Afghanistan, it becomes 4.5 fronts. So that may create problem for Pakistan opening the West Front, but it also creates a strategic problem and military problem for India. Second, sir, you are suggesting that India can have like this international community can lead a military agenda against the dealing with the rising violence in Afghanistan, but who will lead this formation of international community? Because earlier America was leading it and the NATO was supporting it. Is there such kind of alliance, the global alliance, and the global power who can take initiative and lead, and India can support it? Or are you suggesting that India will lead such an initiative? Thank you.
Last question from Chetan. Yes, Chetan, please go ahead.
Yes, sir. Two very quick questions. First is regarding what Shakti sir proposed regarding engaging with Taliban. We have very little to offer in leverage. There is Haqqani, there is Pakistan. India as such has very little to offer to Taliban at this particular moment. And the median age of the Afghan population is around 18. So a large chunk of Afghani population has actually not seen the Taliban control. And we might see a very regressive Taliban once they have actually consolidated power. So in case we are looking for a political solution in future, wouldn't it be better to invest in the current Afghan government and enhancing their potential to strengthen their position when it comes to negotiation? The second question is again attaching to Professor Mattoo's idea of potentially keeping open our military options. Apart from the Wakhan corridor, we also have a base in Tajikistan, which we share with the Tajikistan force, right? So shouldn't we enhance our assets in the region, probably Tajikistan further, to keep that option open moving forward?
The last question from Pinky, since she was the first one to raise hand. Yes, Pinky, please go ahead.
Good morning to all of you. And am I audible?
Yeah. Please go ahead.
First, I want to thank all the speakers. My question is that to what extent do you think that India's soft power diplomacy and the investment that India has done in Afghanistan has been successful, especially when we are seeing the Taliban is taking over rapidly and we haven't been very active in the hard power diplomacy? Also, US's failure in Afghanistan when it comes to intervention. So what lessons can be drawn from that when it comes to intervention at the international level? Thank you.
Begin with Ambassador, maybe Mukhopadhyay sir. Would you like to very briefly respond if you think you would
Very
like to?
quickly, yeah. I mean, I would be happy to give the floor to anyone else, but since you've asked me, let me say that I completely agree. I find no disagreement with what Soumya has said, or with what Pinky has said, and also with what Chetan has said. On Ladhu's point about what is, who would lead such an international mission. I think my point was it would be a UN Security Council resolution, so it would be actually led by the UN. And basically, the idea here would be to give a common message to the Taliban. After all, we know that virtually every country has come out against the idea of an emirate. Even if that is the platform on which we can, find common ground, that would be a strong message to the Taliban. And as far as the military side is concerned, nobody is actually talking about using military. You're actually talking about partnerships and possibly, keeping the other side guessing, and things like that. Basically, it's more a political act than a particularly military act. So I think that's all the points that one point that I would have liked to make is, which Manish said earlier, is, are we looking at a civil war? I don't think actually we are right now still looking at a civil war. We are looking at a possibility of a contest and resistance that the Afghan state will hold out. And worse comes to worse, if the Afghan state does, for some reason or the other, which we don't think will happen, collapse, then there will be a resistance against the Taliban. In other words, the Taliban are not going to be in control. You cannot write off the post-2001 generation. And I would say that we should bet on that rather than an atavistic medieval force. Thank you.
Sir, Sinha sir?
Not really very much to say, in the sense that yes, we work with the government of Afghanistan. Who is the leader right now of the democratic side? I'm not sure. It is definitely not Ghani. People are rallying around Karzai of all people. They are rallying around Karzai as a more acceptable figure. So if the democratic side itself is in a state of confusion, then should you place all your eggs in one basket? That's my only point. Again, I'm saying I'm not advocating friendship with the Taliban. I'm merely saying be in conversation. That conversation may actually give the Taliban the space that they need, some space that they need.
Yeah, but Shakti, we are not talking about individuals. We are talking about the Republic versus the Emirate. And the position is, and the Afghan state versus a group supported by Pakistan.
I agree, Mukho, if there is an Afghan state, we should engage with them, absolutely. We should be strongest supporters, in fact,
Yeah. Let me answer a few things the way I look at it. See, first on the UNSC, Gautam, I would slightly disagree because I feel that UNSC has been fairly ineffective and will do nothing. Basically, because last 20 years, at least in the ISAF, the international forces, 3 of the permanent members of UN Security Council were directly involved. Their troops were present on the ground. They are the ones who are living with a label of defeat and retreat, and they have not done anything. In fact, at best, they have tried to whittle down the UN Security Council restrictions on different terrorist groups, and Taliban was never put on. Second, look at the current situation. Americans know that why they are leaving. They are leaving because they could not succeed. And what was the reason that Taliban became such a potent force? Well, it's obvious, because of external support. Still, they have not bothered to go to UN Security Council. Last week, the most provocative interstate, it was like a declaration of war when Pakistanis, and this also relates to the question about Kandahar, what is happening in Kandahar, when Pakistani Air Force officially warned Afghan Air Force and interdicted the use of air power to recapture Spin Boldak. That was an undeclared war. Though you are drawing a no-fly zone in Afghan territory, still the UN Security Council members have not taken any action, which is really a provocation to interstate. So I will not put too much money on UN Security Council route. It has to be coalition of the willing, people who have supported the Afghan government, the new Afghan system, they have invested in it. If we feel it is worth losing everything, then of course we can all stand aside and do hand wringing. Oh, look, our Taliban has come. Otherwise, Taliban will have to be militarily stopped. And I am not arguing. In fact, I have argued that the US withdrawal perhaps does open a possibility of eventual peace in Afghanistan. It may not happen through a civil war, but unless the state of Afghanistan and the people in Afghanistan can militarily stalemate Taliban in Afghanistan and stop this blitzkrieg, uh, Taliban will have absolutely no incentive to come to peace talks, because right now they feel that military option remains on the table and they will win this war militarily and come to power. So I'll stop there. So this is, it has to be an Afghan effort, of course, supported by outsiders. And we should not be hesitant at all, because Taliban without outside support will crumble tomorrow. Nobody has looked at that angle, that how is Taliban such a potent force, 60,000 people, and they are trying to control a territory which is 1/5 or 1/6 of India.
Exactly.
On Northern Alliance, that why there is no Northern Alliance, why didn't we keep up? I think Professor Mattoo referred to this. Well, let us not forget that once an elected government came into position, all the erstwhile members of Northern Alliance became part of one united government. So, what was Government of India's policy? Not to keep alive different warring groups, but to unite them against a central government, and that I think we successfully did. And they are all still there. There may be differences between them, but they are basically there. So there was no need for Northern Alliance. And for the listeners here, I would like to tell them that we should also not fall into this description, label of Northern Alliance. If you actually look at it, it was not even called Northern Alliance. It was more the Western media which gave this label, and of course Pakistanis encouraged it, because then it made look like as if the northern minorities, Tajiks, Uzbek, Hazaras, are fighting the Pashtun, which they were supporting, the Taliban. But Taliban doesn't represent full Pashtun. For future, while I agree that the erstwhile Northern Alliance leaders have become old, they have perhaps too much to lose. They are not in an age where they can fight battles. But let's not forget, every such situation throws up its own leader, and completely new generation has come along. In Afghan, the misfortune is that the grandchildren are really fighting their grandfather's war even today. So it will be the new generation which will have to stand up, and it will be, and I hope this national alliance we should be fully backing of whatever form, so that while we encourage Taliban to engage peacefully in a political process, but we should absolutely say no to military takeover. And these signs I can now see. Emirates has been said no to by America, China, Iran, Russia, but
Pakistan,
maybe
even Pakistan.
Pakistan also. We, of course, have said no already. And more importantly, the people of Afghanistan, if they don't want it, we cannot allow their to be sort of ridden roughshod over. So these 3 points I thought I wanted to make, and of course that use of Deoband, I think that's a very valid point. We did work on it. Uh, Maybe we can't talk about it so openly, but Deoband has a very special place among Afghan sort of clerics, including within Taliban. And that is true because of the circumstances. They have not been able to utilize it. Maybe we have also not used this straight, well, this is also a soft power of Devan more strategically. But some actions were taken to correct the situation, but I'll leave it at that there. Thank you.
Amar, can I just clarify one point? The idea of a UN Security Council resolution was to convey a message, not a peacekeeping or other such operation. Convey a message to the Taliban that they will not get international legitimacy, provided they do not, stick to certain.
Correct. You see, that is why if you see the current demand of Taliban is what? Release my 7,000 prisoners and delist me. And I don't think we have moved on that. And luckily, India heads that committee, or the two committees which
1 to 6, 7.
after sanctions, yes, and UN Security Council as member.
So we have leverage.
So we have leverage, and we should use it very strategically. And I agree, we should not put our all eggs in any one basket. If that is one basket you have to choose, it should be the Afghan people basket that we should put it.
And at least publicly, there's a consensus against an emirate. So you exploit that to convey that message.
Also remember that great powers are known by their ability to use force when their interests are attacked.
Exactly. Exactly.
No, you are absolutely right, Mr. Mattoo. In fact, the definition of terrorism itself changed after 9/11. No, it was not that terrorism started or terror as state policy started it with 9/11. No, you have and we have all been sufferers of that for long, but the world never paid attention to it. So yes, when it hit them so seriously, when it hurts, then they started thinking and understanding what we are trying to tell them for so many years.
This was the point made by Prime Minister Vajpayee in September 2000, a year before 9/11, to the US Congress.
Yes, I remember that speech. Please.
Great. I think all very terrific responses and fantastic discussion. So with this, we have just, I mean, it's almost 12:40 now. So 10 minutes above what I had promised to the esteemed panel. I now request Shubhranshu, PhD student in CPOT SIS, to give a formal vote of thanks. Over to you, Shubhranshu.
Before that, let me thank you, Manish and Amitabh, and my fellow panelists.
Yes, and thank you all also from my side.
Yeah, and before we finish, let me, Professor Mattoo, I'm sure you would know, Henry Kissinger said a very interesting thing, that for a nation state, it has to win a battle to be called a victor. But for an insurgency, a stalemate itself is victory. And that unfortunately affects the narrative.
Exactly right. Exactly right.
On behalf of the Indian Association of International Studies and the Indian Futures, I'd like to extend heartfelt gratitude to the esteemed panel of today's event, Professor Amitabh Mattoo, Shri Shakti Sinha, Ambassador Gautam Mukhopadhyay, and Ambassador Amar Sinha for their enlightening words, which helped us to understand the evolving situation in Afghanistan and India's options in that. I'd also take this opportunity to thank all the participants and look forward to hosting everyone again in our future endeavors. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.